Hello, welcome to another episode of Varsity360. I'm Columbian sports editor Micah Rice, joined today for the first time this season by Will Denner of the Columbian. And we're here for a fun episode today. We have 1 week of high school football in the bag, and so we have 5 overreactions for what we think we learned this last week in high school football. And now just a warning, they're overreactions. You might say, let the whole season play out. Yeah. But we have just 1 week of data to work from. But we're going to take what we can from it. And of course, a lot can change between week 1 and week 9. So that's the disclaimer. But let's have some fun and talk about those overreactions. But just tell me, how did it feel to be back out on the sidelines under the lights on Friday night?
Oh, it was awesome. I feel like week 1 of high school football season is always a date that we look forward to at the Columbian and high school sports reporters around the country. It was a little bit on the hot side, I would say, a little bit smoky, but it was still a great week, a great atmosphere out at Washougal where I was. And looking forward to getting rolling in week 2.
All right, well, let's get right into it. And our number 1 overreaction from week 1 is we're going to go to the 4A Greater St. Helens League teams and 2 teams that we'll be following all year. But my number 1 overreaction is that Skyview is going to rely more on its offense than its defense, which it did last year. And Camas is going to be just the opposite. They're going to rely primarily on its defense, and we're taking that by what happened week 1. Now, obviously, Camas, we've kind of talked about them and some of the weapons they have on the offensive side, but definitely they put up a defensive performance that was a standout in a win, a 12-6 win over Roosevelt of Seattle, a team coached by former Seahawk Sam Adams that is expected to contend for the Metro League title up there this year. And all Camas did was hold the Rough Riders to 151 total yards and 6 points, those 6 points coming on a kickoff return for a touchdown. So the defense proper did not allow a touchdown at Doc Harris Stadium. So last year we talked about how Camas's offense with all-league quarterback Jake Davidson, Titan Brody, those wonderful receivers that they had, that was really something that made that program go. And certainly that could be the case going forward, but based on what we saw week 1, Camas's defense can be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it all offseason about just, how nasty that front 7 is with the likes of, Luke Webb and Nico Spear and Aiden Jones, Bo Harlan, players like that. But, I think it was a defense last year that had, that potential. And even starting the season, it was a similar deal. It was a really close game against Yelm. I think just 1 score on both sides. But I feel like a defense that was a little bit inconsistent at times last year. But now they look like every bit the defense that we thought they would be going into the season. And obviously, not to take anything away from the Camas offense, we're still very excited to see what they can do with Adam Matheson at the helm in his first year as coach, but that defense looks legit.
Well, Meg and I talked last week about Luke Webb's game wrecker ability coming off that edge. He did not have a sack, but he had 10 quarterback hurries. So that's someone that, even if you don't get home, you can disrupt an offense, and certainly that was the case on Friday with Camas holding them to just, no offensive touchdowns and only 151 yards in offense. So Camas's defense, week 1 overreaction, they're going to be a problem.
Yeah.
A defense that was a problem in Southwest Washington last year was Skyview. They only allowed a little over 7 points per game. They went several weeks in a row without allowing a touchdown at one point during the season. Well, in their week 1 win over Radford of Hawaii, they relied on their offense, and with playmakers like Gavin Packer, who had 2 touchdowns, one a breakaway touchdown and one for a 22-yarder, but then also had a kickoff return and a punt return that would have gone for touchdowns called back by penalties. You pair him with a taller slot type of receiver like Micah Robeson and a senior quarterback, even though he was making his first start, James Doogie Poindexter did everything they asked of him. that Skyview offense is going to be a problem.
Absolutely. And I think, it was interesting how that game kind of unfolded with Packer getting that really strong early start. And then I think after he did most of his damage in the first quarter. And you would think, just on paper, if an opponent held Packer kind of a little bit more at bay as a receiver from the next 3 quarters, that maybe things wouldn't go as great for Skyview, but they really outlasted Radford in that game, and obviously a team coming from Hawaii that already played a few games, and Skyview's still kind of getting some new pieces in there, including that first year starting quarterback, but not only those skill players, but a really experienced offensive line as well that I think has a lot of potential this year. So an offense that looks really legit in week 1.
Well, we're going to talk more about that senior starting quarterback, James Poindexter, later in this. He's part of another one of our overreactions. But in that 31-25 win over Radford, I thought it was a gutsy performance by Skyview. They were down heading into the fourth quarter, outscored the team from Hawaii 14-0 in the fourth quarter. A team that was playing its 3rd game of the season, a team that coming from Hawaii, you would expect not to be fazed by temperatures in the 80s. Even though it was an 8 o'clock kickoff, it was still a warm night. And Skyview was the tougher team down the stretch. And so they showed they could run the ball when they needed to. Levi Webb got a majority of the carries, but also Rex Ollinger kind of spelled him a little bit as more of kind of a shifty scat back. But when they needed a touchdown on back-to-back drives, they got it. And when their defense needed a stop, they got it. But obviously Skyview's offense was the most impressive element of that to me. Now, we'll talk about the defense, I'm sure, as the season goes along. They were missing a key piece in edge rusher Raya Tua, who is going to miss a couple games early this season. He has a broken bone in his left hand, but he should be back before the season gets too long in. But week 1 overreaction. Watch for Camus's defense and Skyview's offense.
I like it.
Yeah. All right. Our number 2 overreaction was from a game that you were at on Friday, and that is Washougal will have the toughest defense in the 2A Greater St. Helens League. What did Washougal's defense do on Friday? They held Class 3A Mountain View to just 6 points and beating them 8-6 in a classic Week 1 slugfest. Elijah Franco coming up clutch over and over and over again with 3 interceptions. What did you see from Washougal's defense that was so impressive?
It really started on the very first play when Cody Jacobus breaks through that veteran Mountain View line and gets a tackle for loss in the backfield, and really it seemed like it got better from there. They got really good push up front with guys like not only Cody, but then their defensive ends and Harrison DeShazier, who's committed to Idaho, and Travis Lundberg. Ben Keller, their linebacker, was coming back from a knee injury that held him to just 2 games last year, and he looked great. They weren't even playing with Mercy Johnston, their other really good senior captain at linebacker, but he's expected to be back this week. And then Franco was really the star of the show with those 3 interceptions, also led the team with 12 tackles. I believe he was their leading tackler last year as well. But yeah, I just thought it was really impressive to see Washougal, another team that I would say had its ups and downs on defense last year, could sometimes rely on a high-powered offense with the Holden B and Sam Evers types to really win games for them. But this was a statement for them in week 1, and I think Dave Hajek, their head coach, was really pleased with just how they came ready to play in that game. And he also credited the jamboree that they had the week before. They played Evergreen and Camas, and talked about how he's had teams in the past that, you play a team like Camas, you're going to take some poundings, obviously, but they didn't back down. And he said the kids still wanted to play for that jamboree, and that was just a maturation process he saw in his Washougal guys from seasons prior.
Well, that's why you mentioned it, that the defense last year was kind of an up and down story. That's why it was such a curveball for me to see.
Right.
A low scoring game in week 1 against a 3A team, and one, like you mentioned, that we had talked about, that Mountain View big offensive front being a real weapon and one of the best units in the county. And so for them to kind of shut down Mountain View's running game, to put in context, Washougal, of course, last year did rely mostly on that outstanding quarterback, quarterback, wide receiver combo of Holden B and Sam Evers. But on defense, they gave up 38 points to Ridgefield. They gave up 35 points to Woodland. And so it was kind of, obviously they had some good games in there too against some of the teams that finished a little lower in the league. But for starters to make that kind of statement, like you said, it's kind of putting teams in the 2A Greater St. Helens League on notice that you should be ready for a rock fight when you go up against Washougal.
Well, it's an interesting thing about that Woodland game last year, because who was the Beavers head coach? Sean McDonald, who's now in his first year at Mountain View. And, that's a coach that Washougal obviously has great respect for, and he's an offense guy. And obviously Washougal kind of got gashed in that game last year. I think they gave up over 400 yards of offense as well, and that was really a key game that decided that league title last year for Woodland. But again, a really good statement for Washougal against that line. And Aiden Brown, their senior running back, is really legit. He was kind of in a time split last year with Porter Drake, but really impressive performance by Washougal to hold those guys to one score in that game.
So we'll see if Washougal can keep that intensity and that performance on defense going forward. But based on week one, that Washougal defense is going to be something to watch. We move now to our number 3 week one overreaction, and that is that no player in Southwest Washington will finish this season with more all-purpose yards than Aiden Brown of Kalama. The talented quarterback that can kind of do everything all over the field. He led Kalama to a 34-15 win over Woodland, a Woodland team that obviously is a Class 2A team. That was a clash between two of the best all-around players in the area. Well, in this match between Aiden Brown and Elijah Anderson of Woodland, it went to Aiden Brown. All he did was 191 yards rushing, 4 touchdowns, 175 yards passing, 1 touchdown. He is going to just put up some silly numbers this year.
Yeah, and 18 rushing attempts for a quarterback. That's impressive. I got a chance to see them play last year in their, I believe it was a state first round game against Friday Harbor, and Aiden Brown in that game threw for over 300 yards. So really the definition of a dual threat quarterback, and obviously he's a starter on defense too. So no time off for him, and I think they can go really far this year behind guys like Aiden Brown and Drew Schlangen as well. But Aiden Brown is primed for a big year, and to do it against a Woodland defense that returned 8 starters this year, won the 2A GSHL title. Really impressive stuff.
Well, I think we're sort of in a fortunate situation in our job in that in past years, obviously, I don't need to tell anybody in Kalama about how long they've been a great program there. But from our perspective, they were kind of the odd team out in that they played for the last basically decade in a 2B league, a team that doesn't have any other teams that we really cover in this area. So it was kind of like, we'd pay attention a little bit to what Kalama's doing, but we're not going to go up to, say, Adna or on Alaska to cover a game like that. But now that they're in the Trico League proper, now that they're in the mix with Seton Catholic, with La Center, with Stevenson, with Kingsway, we're going to be seeing a lot of Kalama, and that's a team that's going to be fun to watch because of that dynamic playmaking ability of someone like Aiden Brown.
Yeah, and I mean it's exciting that they're added to the Trico, and I think maybe they're a little bit under the radar right now with a couple other teams that we're about to mention, but Kalama should be right in the mix as well. And again, it goes back to Aiden Brown, and we're really excited to see what can happen.
All right, so peg him based on week one to finish this season with the most all-purpose yards of any player in Southwest Washington. I think you get pretty good odds on that, but 8 more weeks to go plus the playoffs. We'll stay with the small schools for our week 4 overreaction. And we talked a lot leading into the season about La Center. We talked a lot about Seton Catholic and just how excited we were to see kind of the collision course in the Trico League for those teams. And Meg went out on a limb last week and said that she believes both of those teams will make it to the Class 1A semifinals. My overreaction for this week, number 1, focuses on La Center. For as much praise as we've given La Center, and it was kind of a little bit like, is this the year that Seton Catholic kind of gets their number, but still, watch out for La Center. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that they are even better than we've given them credit for. And I say that because in week one, they go up to Montesano, a team that's a perennial postseason presence in there, and they beat the Bulldogs 35-7. And I say it also because we had a breakout performance by Wyatt Iceland, a guy who played center last year, believe it or not. He takes over the quarterback reins. All he does is rush for two TDs, pass for another TD, and on defense, run back a 92-yard interception return for a touchdown. Will, how many players who played center last year have a 92-yard touchdown interception return on their resume?
Oh, that's insane. Yeah, I think that's in rare company for sure. I remember hearing in the offseason when he was kind of penciled in as possibly one of their starting quarterbacks. I was surprised to hear that, and only because of the positions he had played previously. But what an all-around athlete, your classic, small town football player who can do it all. And he's a great linebacker as well, obviously, as shown by that interception return. But I mean, just really an impressive performance from the Wildcats. I remember looking at that game in week one at Montesano and kind of wondering, that's a tough place to play. That's against a Bulldogs team that's a perennial state qualifier. And all the center does is march in there and win 35-7. And I think they held Montesano scoreless until the fourth quarter. So just a really complete game, I would say, on both sides of the ball. And even a player like Isaac Cromie had around 150 yards rushing. And then obviously they have Houston Coyle, who's another dynamic athlete at receiver and defensive back. So just really impressive stuff from Le Center. And I mean, I think it really just comes down to just how complete of a team they look like right now on both sides of the ball. And really excited to see where they can go from here.
Now, the beautiful thing about a budding rivalry, and we do, I would say, have a budding football rivalry between Seton Catholic and Le Center, is that anytime you mention one team, the other team is like, what about us?
Yeah.
And that's not, Seton Catholic did everything that we kind of expected them to do in week one. They dominated Columbia River 56-7. We can make an overreaction point about how we shower so much praise on Seton's offense and their playmakers, but how their defense really won the day for them on Friday. Caveat being that's against a River team that's figuring a few things out, adopting a new offense and switching to the wing T, and one that I think any of us sort of expected Seton Catholic to really have a good showing. But I think we'd be honest to say we were more surprised by the dominance of Le Center in week one. And that's why they're our week one overreaction. For as much praise as we lavished on Le Center, they might even be better than we thought.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And I think it also kind of comes down to the opponent again. And obviously, having to make like a multi-hour road trip and things like that, all variables in high school football games, obviously. And that's kind of why the praise for Le Center is what it is. But yeah, Seton Catholic, I mean, that defensive performance was really impressive. Meg wrote about that in that game story, and those 4 interceptions and holding a River team to just one touchdown. And I thought it was interesting too. I mean, it's a River team that's kind of going to a more run heavy wing T look, and it seemed like Seton Catholic really just kind of stood up and played well in the trenches. And then of course we know their offense is high octane as ever, scoring 56 points in that game, although some of those did come from the defense as well. But really a good another complete performance from the Cougars.
Well, it goes to say that the Trico League might be one of the more entertaining leagues to follow in the 2024 high school football season. We'll end with our 5th overreaction, and we're kind of circling back in this one, and that is that the rookie quarterbacks will be all right.
Yeah.
There's always a little bit of uncertainty when you have a first-year signal caller for any team, and certainly there are a number of teams out there every year that put a new kid back, but a few stood out to us. Obviously, we can talk about Jaden Baum at Evergreen, which we did last week. And he, the freshman there, led the Plainsmen to their first ever win over Union. So mission accomplished there. But 2 quarterbacks that really stood out, and we mentioned a little bit this one already. What James Doogie Poindexter waited his turn. He's a senior, takes over for last year's senior Jake Kennedy, and all he does in his first varsity start is go 15 for 23 for 301 yards, making some great decisions late in the game. Number one, most impressive to me, he did not turn the ball over. He actually checked down on a 4th and long in the fourth quarter. He wanted to go to Gavin Packer, but the defense wasn't allowing it. So he checked down to his number 2 option, Micah Robeson, for a huge 4th down conversion that set up the game-winning touchdown. Certainly Skyview knows that it has its guy there at quarterback. But you mentioned another guy making his first start. So why don't you talk about the Ridgefield quarterback?
Yeah, so Landon DeBeaumont comes into the Spudders program. Obviously, he's been at the varsity level prior to this season as a junior. He was a slot receiver primarily last year as a sophomore, took most of the JV reps at quarterback. But Ridgefield had kind of had this interesting dilemma the past few years where they had Logan DeBeaumont, Landon's older brother, and Braden Malella kind of they were in the same class. They were both kind of on an equal, playing field, and they split a lot of the reps, which I think, it worked. They had moments, but I think it was tricky at times for the Spudders to kind of identify who their guy was. They now know that Landon DeBeaumont is unquestionably that guy. He took all the reps through spring, got a full summer, building rapport with a good receiving core. He has an experienced senior running back in Clyde Stevens, and it seems like they kind of know their identity now. And it was a little bit of a slow start against Prairie. I think their offense stalled out a couple times in early drives, but then he ends up throwing for nearly 250 yards, 3 touchdowns, and Ridgefield rolled to a 48-7 win against Prairie. And although it was kind of a tough week for the 2A GSHL, they go 2-6, but Ridgefield and Washougal both beat 3A teams. And in Ridgefield's case, I feel like they have something special at quarterback. And full disclosure, I did pick Ridgefield to win the league title, and I think part of it is just the depth that they have, and experience. They're a big program. They're probably one of the biggest at the 2A level. Just have depth all over the field, and I really think a good debut for Landon DeBeaumont and something that they can build on.
Now, always, if we learned anything last year, is take it with a grain of salt when you try to predict anything about the 2A Greater
Yes.
St. Helens League. But based on what you said, we saw in week 1, Washougal are obviously, they step on defense, but you look at the other teams in that league. Hudson's Bay's got some questions. Woodland's got some questions now after that week 1 loss to Kalama. Mark Morris, we will be interested to see kind of how they develop over the course of the season with their new offense and new head coach up there. But there's some teams in that league working through some stuff.
Right.
But as far as week 1, and we only have week 1 data to go on right now, Ridgefield and Washougal are 2 of the teams to watch in that league.
For sure. And, nothing against some of those other teams. This could easily not age well in a few weeks if they turn things around. I will say for Woodland, I know this is an overreaction episode, but I would say don't react too strongly to that, because remember last year also they did lose to La Center, I believe, in the second week of the season, and ended up being fined for the league. So it's there are question marks though, and I think that's ultimately why we're kind of seeing right now Ridgefield and Washougal maybe rising to the top a bit, but it's 1 week and things can change in a hurry.
Week 2, we could be taking back everything we were saying right now. That's all we do. We don't play the games. We just talk about them.
Right. Exactly.
All right. So thank you for joining us again on Varsity360. We've loved the viewership numbers we've gotten. It shows that there's a lot of enthusiasm for this high school football season, especially. We'll be sure to talk about some of the other sports as we go along. But week 2 is here, coming up this Friday. Follow us on 360preps.com for all the updated information, all the game reports, all the stats, and we will see you out on the field.